Every now and then, a company produces something that can be called a world first. Out of all the world firsts I've ever seen, this is certainly one of them. The Sineaptic SE-1 is the world's first dual ribbon array wireless headphone that features ribbon drivers. I won't go deep into the significance of this, but it should suffice to say that it shares DNA with the RAL requisite SR1A, the gold planar GL1200, and the Allen ribbon headphones. For a $200 headphone, the build is quite a few notches below my expectations. The plastic feels a bit cheap, the joint between the half yokes and cups are not rigid enough to prevent friction between the two, and there's no mechanical swivel between the headband and the cups. However, the entire build and the tolerances between the parts are not bad at all. The wing suspension pads work quite well, and in my case a little too well. I feel like they forced the headphone just a few millimeters higher than my preferred level, but they're actually fairly comfortable and not as distracting as I expected since they put pressure on a different part of my head than I'm used to, and they distribute the 412 grams of weight quite well. The 3.5mm auxiliary cable, it's bad, but it's really an accessory and I don't recommend using it. It's simply just too long and has too much memory. This headphone is first and foremost a wireless headset, and if you want to use the auxiliary input, the headphone must be charged. The headphone will not play audio without charge. So if you have any delusions of plugging these into your $5,000 mithril plated headphone amplifier, it's time to pump the brakes. Ribbons are unlike most of the common transducer types, and as such, they possess very low resistance, usually in the single digits. The SE-1 runs off an internal battery-powered D-class amplifier just like any regular wireless headphone. However, unlike regular wireless headphones, I'm certain it will have to be carefully designed to power ribbon drivers. This means if you plug your mains powered headphone amp into the auxiliary input, not only are you significantly bi-amping, which is prone to introducing distortion, you're also dealing with a sensitivity rating your amp is almost certainly not designed to perform with. Going back a bit, this is exactly the reason that the headphone will not play audio without being charged. They can only be powered by their specially designed internal D-class amp. Another small oddity I noticed is that if you unplug the headphone from one auxiliary source and into another, the headphone will effectively turn itself off. You need to turn it back on and into wireless mode, and then plug the auxiliary cable back in and go into auxiliary mode. In my testing, the SE-1 sounded mediocre to quite bad with desktop amps. The three most significant problems were loud background hissing, poorly altered frequency response, and high distortion. So when using this headphone, how it's actually meant to be used, in order from least to best, my phone's 3.5 headphone out wasn't bad, but the volume was weak. My laptop and mobile phone's Bluetooth connection was the next best, but still about on par with the wide 3.5mm output. Finally, the very best sound I achieved was, by far, plugging these into my Walnut V2 portable WAV player. It seems that either the ribbons or the amp inside the headphone is extremely sensitive to the electronics inside mains-powered desktop amplifiers. As soon as you take it off the grid and give them the beans, they really open up. And I don't mean that in a hyperbolic way. Rarely does one get to hear such an obvious difference between amps. I should think that similar results should be achievable when using other powered DAPs and phone dongle DACs, but your mileage, of course, may vary. I should also note that a friend of mine was able to get good results out of his desktop amp, which has a mains-free battery power mode, so going off-grid really seems to be key. So, when amping it properly, at this level, the only two things holding the headphone back are the quiet, constant humming of the amp, which is notably much quieter than when incorrectly bi-amping, and the treble, which can be at times extremely piercing. Here's a frequency response graph. We can see that everything above 6 kHz is louder than the rest of the sound. Thankfully, most of us can simply dial down the treble on our phones, DAPs, and even through Windows, but some purists among you may be turned off by this. For a $200 headphone, the sound is quite a few notches above my expectations. The first thing you might notice is just how clear, extended, and airy the treble is, as long as you're not listening to music that transforms it into an acoustic razor blade. While the treble is too strong, it is undeniably punching up, very high up. Directly compared with the treble on my Hi-Fi HE500, I believe the SE-1 edges out in the lead, but was inevitably quite fatiguing after an hour or so. Mids are tuned a bit cold, with a very slight rise all the way up that can make it sound a bit thinner and less full-bodied than other headphones. There's also a small dip between 1 and 2 kHz, so the upper mids might sound a bit too far back for some, but in reality it doesn't make a big difference compared to the other aspects of the tuning. If we compare it to something like the AKG K501, which has the best mid-range tuning of any headphone ever made, don't question it, then the SE-1 lags behind a bit, but the SE-1's ability to render detail is still unquestionably excellent, and sits comfortably among other flagships, ranging between $200 to $1,000. This is the most unique presentation of bass I've ever heard. If you're not a fan of thicker, boomier, high-end mid-bass, these sound something like a small set of bookshelf speakers in combination with a small subwoofer with a high cut. The rise down to 30 Hz gives these such an oddly separated low end that is both extremely airy and strangely well textured and layered, with some actual very low-end slam. No doubt the dual ribbon array is responsible for this. Bass will never bleed into the mid-range, it's completely separated. Some might find this jarring, as it straddles the fence between a V-shaped fun signature and pure sterility, an utterly unique presentation that I'm not used to, but I don't hate it. In all my testing, the type of music that these seem to excel with was more simple acoustic and vocal music. The scooped mid-bass made this type of genre sound actually more realistic in some cases, as if that kind of tuning is put into other headphones not to reproduce the music more accurately, but to reproduce the sound of loudspeakers in a room situation more accurately. Pop and EDM was mostly very good. I thought there might not be enough mid-bass for pop, but some tracks actually sounded better in some cases compared to some of my other headphones. Then there were some more complex, more layered tracks that lacked dynamics and punch. Occasionally a very bassy electronic track would introduce slight bass distortion, and other times they would dig down lower into the sub-bass with more air, texture and authority than some planars costing, well, over 10 times the price. But the weakest genre was rock and metal, which suffered a lack of full-bodiedness and imaging. I thought the imaging and soundstage was actually the only significant weaker part of the sound. The sense of instruments in a stereo space is definitely smaller than large planars like the HE500, and large dynamic headphones, which I find generally can have the largest staging. I found only one successful candidate in my pad drawer, which is a 10cm diameter fenestrated leather. It did a pretty good job of warming up the mid-range response without affecting the bass or treble too much. While the bass response appears to remain untouched, if we look at this frequency response graph, there was a notable increase in slam from using a less porous material. I don't care. It's a microphone and it's crap. Whatever. At this price point, it is more than fair to expect some compromises from a headphone that markets its headphone directly in comparison with renowned audiophile favorite and leading luxury model. I'm certain that most of the cost went into the R&D and the technology behind the ribber drivers, internal amplification, and the tuning of this headphone. As I've said before in other videos, headphones are firstly a wearable, and secondly something that makes sound. If those are my basic requirements, I cannot help but give this headphone not only a passing grade, but a recommendation. I can't say I'm a fan of the always-on policy. One day the battery will either eventually die, or need replacing due to repeated charging cycles, and the lack of an ear cup swivel wasn't a big problem for me personally, but with billions of other shaped heads in the world, it's surely going to become a problem for someone else down the road. So, if you think the headphone fits into your listening habits or lifestyle, you don't mind using EQ to turn the treble down a notch, and you're looking for something genuinely exotic, these are worth a look. However, if you're the kind of person who simply can't stand the distant hum of an air conditioner or PC fans, you probably might want to skip these. Personally, I think the quest for the world's best wireless gaming headset is not over. So I'll see you in the next one.